Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to another Second Look Bible study, where the second look always takes you deeper into God's Word. My name is Jim Schaefer. I'm a retired pastor and Bible teacher, and I share every week a Bible study. Right now, we are at the very beginning of a series entitled Understanding the Old Testament. This was requested by a number of the followers of this particular Bible study, and so over the next quite a few weeks, we're looking at the Old Testament. Now, in our last lesson, we looked at the entire scope of the Old Testament to try to give you just a feel for where the beginning was and where the end was and how it related to the New Testament. Today, we're going to take a little closer look at the first 5 books of the Old Testament. But I want to go ahead and take a quick look at the whole idea. Again, this is entitled Old Testament Books or Understanding the Old Testament. Now, this particular lesson is going to focus on the Pentateuch. The Pentateuch. Do you have any idea what the name Pentateuch means? I'm going to give you a few minutes to make a comment there in the comment section. It's also referred to as the Torah, or the books of Moses, or the law, and sometimes referred to as the law of Moses. So, get ready with me as we take a look at these first 5 books and at that overall look. To start with, let's talk about something that has been asked me a couple of times in this series. One of the things that people have asked is, what's a good book that I could use to help study the Old Testament? Well, I've got 2 of them for you today that I'd like to recommend, and here they are. The first book that you see there is entitled What the Bible is All About. It is right now $10.49 on Amazon. There is 2 versions of it. There is a King James version and there is a New International version. I do recommend the New International version, but either one would be fine. What the Bible is all about is a very simple guide to the entire Bible, but its information on the Old Testament is really exceptional. This is one of the books that I'm using in preparation for this study. The second book is a book that I used during my master's degree in religious education. And it was written by Norman Geisler, and it's called A Popular Survey of the Old Testament, $18.14 on Amazon right now. My copy doesn't look anywhere near as nice as this particular one does. But this book covers just the Old Testament and provides a book-by-book overview. And I recommend either one of those. In fact, I gave out What the Bible is All About by Henrietta Mears for Christmas to a number of people, including my grandson. There is a version for children as well. Now, let's take a look at the entire Old Testament. The entire Old Testament is divided into 5 categories: the law, history, poetry, major prophets, and minor prophets. Now, the law is the first 5 books: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. That is the focus of our study here today. The second category is history. And that covers Joshua, Judges, Ruth, 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, 1st and 2nd Chronicles, Ezra, Nehemiah, and Esther. And that brings to a close the entire history portion of the Old Testament. Then there are 5 books of poetry. The first is Job, then Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and finally the Song of Solomon. Psalms was written by King David, and all of the rest, with the exception of Job, was probably written by Solomon. We don't know who the author of Job was. Most people will place the book of Job all the way back during the time of the Genesis, But these are the 5 books of poetry. Following that, we have 5 major prophets: Isaiah, Jeremiah, Lamentations, Ezekiel, and Daniel. And then we have 12 minor prophets: Hosea, Joel, Amos, Obadiah, Jonah, Micah, Habakkuk, Zephaniah, Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi. Now, the difference between a major prophet and a minor prophet, if you know, go ahead and place the comment down in the description. We've talked about this on a number of occasions. The difference between the major prophets and minor prophets is major prophets wrote more. Okay, very simply, they took a lot longer to put their ideas down, and their writings make up the major prophets. Now, there are 12 minor prophets, and we call them minor prophets not because they were less important, but because they wrote less. So when we take a look at the books from Hosea through Malachi, they're going to be much shorter than the books of Isaiah, Jeremiah, Lamentations, Ezekiel, and Daniel. They are not less important. They are not more important. The major prophets and the minor prophets simply refers to the length of those particular books. So those are the 5 categories. Now, I did share with you on Facebook the idea that there have been a number of different divisions or categories of Old Testament books. They have always contained 39 books. Now, you might read someplace where the number of books is 3 less, and that's because the book of 1st and 2nd Samuel were considered one book for a period of time. The book of 1st and 2nd Kings were one book. The book of 1st and 2nd Chronicles were one book. And so you might see a discrepancy there, but we're talking about the same number of books, the same number of pages, the same information, whether you count it as 39 books or 36 books. Now, it is also important for us to understand that there are some ideas here that I think are very important for us to understand. Let me give you a picture of a timeline. Now, I shared this in our last lesson, but it included the complete Old Testament and New Testament. I've shortened it so that we can see it a little bit better. We start with, all the way over to the left there, creation. And that's basically the book of Genesis. The next book, or books, is the patriarchs. This would be Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, who will become Israel, and his 12 sons, and primarily Joseph. All right? Those are the patriarchs. Following that, we have the Exodus. And by the way, creation and the patriarchs all fit under the category of Genesis. And then the Exodus is going to include the books of Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. As we'll see in a few moments, they all tell a different part of the story of the Exodus. Following the Exodus, we have the conquest. This is where the children of Israel are going to enter into the promised land. They are going to conquer the promised land, which is Israel. And so we see that it is represented there by the flag, and it is basically the book of Joshua. And you'll see this when we start looking at the various pictures of each book of the Bible. Then we have the period of time of the judges. Again, the judges will take place after the children of Israel have conquered the land, and they're looking for leadership, and there will be a period of 7 instances where the people will rebel against God, and God will send another country in to discipline them. The people will pray for a deliverer, that would be the judge, who rises up to power. And there's going to be 7 of those. There'll be a period of 7 judgments and 7 judges that are going to lead the children of Israel out of the bondage from various countries. That's the book of Judges. And then we enter into the period of time of the kingdom of Israel. Now, the word kingdom means there was a king, all right? And the books represented are going to be 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, and then 1st and 2nd Chronicles. 1st and 2nd Samuel will deal with King Saul, and then 2nd Samuel, King David. Then we'll look at, in 1st Kings, Solomon, and then following Solomon will be a whole series of kings that we'll get into for 2nd Kings. Now, the books of 1st and 2nd Chronicles are going to cover the same period of time as Samuel and the Kings, but it's going to give us a little different perspective. But it's still the same story that's taking place. Now, the kingdoms will come to an end. There is a period of time where the kingdom is whole, is the whole kingdom of Israel, and that's going to be represented by Saul, then King David, then King Solomon. At King Solomon's death, the kingdom is going to be divided into 2 kingdoms, all right? And they will be the kingdom of Israel, which is the northern kingdom, and the kingdom of Judah, which is the southern kingdom. The kingdom of Judah will continue much longer than the kingdom of Israel. The kingdom of Israel will go into captivity from the Assyrians, and the kingdom of Judah will go into captivity because of the Babylonians. That brings us to the next period, and that's the exile. The exile is this period of time when the children of Israel, the Israelites, are removed from their homeland, and they are in exile in Babylon. It is during the exile that we meet Daniel and Ezekiel as prophets. They're going to prophesy during this period of time. And there's going to be about 70 years there that they're in exile. Now, the northern kingdom never will come back. All right? They're going to have been scattered among the Assyrian nations and lost to humanity. The kingdom of Judah will be permitted to go back to Israel, to the city of Jerusalem, and they will begin to rebuild the temple, which would have been destroyed by King Nebuchadnezzar, and they will begin to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem. That story is told in the book of Ezra and Nehemiah. Now, that basically brings us to the end of our Old Testament period. We also add in the book of Esther there because she is associated with the Persian Empire, which is the country that allows the Israelites to go back to Israel. So you can see all of the various books there. But what is not accounted for in this diagram is the major and minor prophets. By and large, the major and minor prophets are going to take place during the kingdom period. All right? Now, we do have Daniel and Ezekiel that will bleed into the exile, but by and large, most of the major prophets and minor prophets will occur during the kingdom age. So that gives you a quick overview of the Old Testament history. Now, I did take a look and show you a graphic, and I hope you've had an opportunity to copy it and be able to look at it in more detail. Here's what it looked like, and I'm going to give you a new look at it, but it will provide you with an overview of the entire Old Testament and how everything fits together. You will notice that Genesis, Exodus, and Numbers are there at the top, and underneath them you've got Job, Leviticus, and Deuteronomy. And then immediately following that, you've got the period of time of Joshua, and you've got the Judges, and during the Judges is also where Ruth fits in. Then you've got 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, and also 1st and 2nd Chronicles, which is taking place there. If you will notice above all of those, you will see all of the various prophets and how the vast majority of them fit into the time period of the kings, all right, in 1st and 2nd Samuel and 1st and 2nd Kings, 1st and 2nd Chronicles. 2 take place during the exile, and finally you've got 3 that are going to take place during Ezra and Nehemiah's time. So that's just to give you a feel for the entire Old Testament. You will notice at the bottom, underneath where it shows us 1st and 2nd Samuel and 1st and 2nd Kings, you're going to see that that's where we are going to have King Saul, King David, Solomon, and the various books of poetry other than Job are going to take place during this period of time. Now, I went and tried to look at this in a little closer detail. We're going to look today at the first 5 books of the Old Testament: Genesis, Exodus, Numbers, Leviticus, and Deuteronomy. Again, these 5 books are called the Law, or the Torah, or the Law of Moses, or the Books of Moses, or, as I said, the Pentateuch. The word Pentateuch comes from the Greek, and it means 5 tools, or 5 vessels, or 5 books. And so it's a good term to look at when we're looking at those 5 books. And I'm going to leave Job off for right now, and we'll cover it when we look at the books of poetry. Now, these 5 books make up the Torah, and this is what the Jewish people call those first 5 books. And I want to give you just a really quick overview of those 5 books. And then starting in our next lesson, we're going to look at Genesis for a complete lesson, then Exodus, then Leviticus, then Numbers, and Deuteronomy. But I want to give you a real quick overview of those 5 books. My strategy in this entire series is to look at the big picture and then to focus in on the individual books. I want you to have a grasp, not so much what each book says, because we could spend the next 6 months looking at Genesis alone. But I want you to have a feel for the overview or the flow of the entire Old Testament. So we're going to look at each of these books real quick, and I'm going to give you some highlights, and then we'll look at them in detail over the next few weeks. The first book we're going to look at is the book of Genesis, and it is represented by this cartoon picture. These cartoons are from Walk Through the Bible. They're a tremendous resource. If you ever have the opportunity to attend a Walk Through the Bible seminar, I encourage you to do so. But here's the book of Genesis. You will notice that the word Genesis itself means beginning, all right? And you will notice that there is a big N in this word, and that is to remind us that Genesis is the book of big N beginnings. It's the book of beginnings. And as we look at the book of Genesis, we are going to see the beginning of everything. It's the beginning of this world. It's the beginning of sin. It's the beginning of everything but God, because God has no beginning and no end. We're going to look at some of the stories that are found in the book of Genesis in our next lesson. But just to give you a quick overview, God is going to choose a man by the name of Abraham, and he is going to call him from his hometown of Ur, of the Chaldeans, and he's going to travel to the area of the land of Canaan. There, God is going to call him to be the first of the patriarchs. The second is going to be his son Isaac, and then Isaac's son, or grandson, it's Isaac's son, but the grandson of Abraham. And we're going to see that, and I've gotten all confused here, God chooses Abraham, and then his son Isaac, and then the grandson Jacob. Jacob's going to be renamed Israel, and it is going to be this lineage through which God is going to bless the whole world. The main theme of the book of Exodus is on the election of the nation of Israel. Now, Genesis 12, 1 through 3 says this, and I want you to listen to it. The Lord had said to Abraham, "Go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land I will show you. I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. You will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you I will curse, and all people on the earth will be blessed through you. Now this is the promise that God is making to Abraham. Now between the book of Genesis and the book of Exodus is going to be a period of time of 430 years. All right? At the end of this 430 years, we are going to be introduced to the time of the Exodus. So let's look at the picture for Exodus. The book of Exodus, the chosen people of God that was represented by Abraham, will end up in the land of Egypt. They will get there because Joseph is the one who is going to be sold into slavery, and he will end up in Egypt. And after he is long gone, we will see that the children of Israel, which were in Egypt, will be trying to get out of Egypt back to the promised land, and Moses is going to lead them out of their captivity. Now there is a period of time of 430 years between Genesis and Exodus. This is important for us to understand because there's nothing going on during this period of time other than the children of Israel are becoming slaves in Egypt. Exodus starts the story of the exit of the Jewish nation out of Egypt and into the promised land. The theme of Exodus is going to be on redemption. God is going to redeem the nation. So we can see in this picture, it's got an exit sign. They are exiting from Egypt into crossing the Red Sea and eventually entering into the land of Canaan. The next book that we want to look at is the book of Leviticus. Now, the book of Leviticus is God instructing the people on how to be holy in both soul and body. In fact, one of the frequent lines that we find in the book of Leviticus is, "You shall be therefore holy, for I am holy," in Leviticus 11:45. This phrase is going to be repeated over and over and over again. God is trying to teach Israel that they need to be separated from their sin and separated unto God. They are to be sanctified, and that's the central teaching of the book of Leviticus. Now, you'll notice in the picture, we've got a man dressed in Levi's, and somebody is kissing his toe. That's Levi Tokus, or Leviticus, all right? Hence the picture there. And the book of Leviticus is the book for the Levites. The Levites were the tribe that were chosen to be the priests and the leaders of the nation of Israel. And the book of Leviticus is all about the people setting themselves apart for God. It is a book of offerings and feasts. Now, the offerings that we're talking about in Leviticus are not taking up a collection like we consider an offering to be, but they were the sacrificial offerings, the killing of a lamb or the turtle doves or the various offerings are going to be described in the book of Leviticus. The feasts are going to be the holy days that are there to remind people to serve God. That's what the book of Leviticus is all about. And the book of Leviticus is going to take place during this period of time after the children of Israel have exited out of Egypt and they're preparing to enter into the promised land. Now remember, they're going to wander in the wilderness for 40 years. That brings us to the next book, which is the book of Numbers. We can tell in this picture that there are a number of numbers there, and they are blindfolded, and they are wandering aimlessly. Now, the distance from Egypt into the land of Canaan probably wouldn't take much more than a couple of months to travel, but the children of Israel are going to wander for 40 years. Why is that? Well, the book of Numbers is going to tell us this story. What's going to take place is the people will continually rebel against Moses and against God, and because of their sin, God is going to have them wander for 40 years, so that generation of people will not enter into the promised land. It's part of God's judgment. So the people are guided through the wilderness on their way back to the promised land. Despite their disobedience, God directed them day by day using a cloud which moved before them. The chief lesson of the book of Numbers is that the Lord gives direction to his people in spite of their rebellion. The final book in this 5-book series is the book of Deuteronomy. Now, you may look at that and say, how in the world does that picture represent Deuteronomy? But let me tell you, if you will get this picture in your mind, you'll never forget what Deuteronomy is all about, any more than you're going to forget that Genesis is the big N, beginnings. Exodus is the exiting from Egypt. Leviticus is offerings and feasts and the Levites. And Numbers is the wandering in the wilderness by the children of Israel. By the way, it was called Numbers because the book starts with a census or a counting of the people in the first chapter and in the last chapter. 2 different censuses, and they were given so that they would know how many able-bodied men they had in order to fight and enter in and conquer the land of Israel. But the book of Deuteronomy, and again, the way to remember that is you take a look and you will notice you have 2 sets of laws. You've got law 1 in the background and the second law in the foreground. They're singing because 2 people singing is a duet. And they are running on top of this person. So what we see in this picture is duet, run on me, Deuteronomy. Now, what is the book of Deuteronomy about? It's about the second giving of the law. This is taking place near the end of the children of Israel's time wandering in the wilderness, near the end of their 40 years. They're standing on the brink of entering into the land of Canaan. The previous generation has died. Moses is reaching the end of his life, and he wants to make sure that they understand everything that has taken place over the last 40 years. So it is the second giving of the law. Moses gives his farewell speech to Israel. They include a repetition of the commandments that God gave, the 10 commandments, and these commandments were to be the key to spiritual success in the promised land. Therefore, the primary lesson in Deuteronomy was the instruction of the nation. So we've got a quick look here at those first 5 books. And I hope that in looking at all of these, you get a pretty good feel for the first 5 books. Genesis is the book of beginnings. And it's primarily the beginning of the nation Israel and how through this nation God is going to bless the whole world. Genesis starts, with God, but Genesis ends in a coffin. Now, we'll get into this more in our next lesson, but I think that's a very important idea. We start with God choosing a group of people, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, the children of Jacob, or the children of Israel, one of which is Joseph. Joseph's sold into slavery, and he ends up in Egypt. He rises to power, becomes second in command in Egypt, and ends up saving his entire family. They end up moving to Egypt, and from there, they will become slaves. Again, there is a period of time of 430 years from the end of Genesis to the beginning of Exodus. Exodus is the exiting from Egypt. All right. Then we've got the book of Leviticus, which is for the Levites, primarily offerings and feasts, and how to be set apart or sanctified for God. The book of Numbers is about how they will wander in the wilderness because of their sin. And finally, the book of Deuteronomy is the second giving of the law. Duet, run on me, Deuteronomy, the second giving of the law. So there you have the first 5 books, the Pentateuch. I hope you have found those to be interesting. Let me again encourage you to check out my YouTube channel long after we're done with Facebook. All of these lessons are placed on YouTube. And again, you can simply go to youtube.com /add Jim Schaefer 8933. And then if you'll add a /playlist and just look for the Old Testament series, all of those will be there, as well as all of the other lessons we've taught. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I know it's been a little long today. I promise they won't be quite this long in the future, but I hope you have found this to be interesting. Thank you so much for watching.